This is the story of how the worst decision of my life started turning into something I never saw coming. The restaurant was called the Gilded Fig. One of those places where the music, bossa nova, turned down just low enough not to distract you, seemed chosen specifically to make people vulnerable. There were no prices on the wine list. That detail hit me the second I pushed through the heavy glass door. My reflection passed too fast across the entryway mirror, and my one good black blouse looked plain under all that amber light. My hands were already sweating. I felt like a fraud before I'd said a single word. The hostess led me between the tables with a practiced smile. The smell of polished wood and expensive wine reminded me of every other room I'd ever walked into that wasn't built for someone like me, but where I needed to be anyway. I wasn't there by accident. I was there because I'd taken money to play a part. An ugly part, one I'd promised myself would be quick. Then I saw her, and the floor tilted. She was sitting with total ease behind the table, her wheelchair angled with the kind of precision that made it look like part of the room's design. There was no self-consciousness in her posture, just presence. She looked up the exact moment I stopped in front of the empty chair, and before I said a word, before the plan even started, she asked, in a calm voice that took me completely apart, "Are you scared?" In that second, the money in my bag felt alive, and I understood that this night was not going to follow the script I'd rehearsed. I sat down slowly, the cold leather seat pressing against my skin. She waited. She didn't look away, didn't rush to fill the silence. That undid me more than any question could have. People like her, I'd already learned this, usually got talked over, rushed, handled like they needed to be spared something. She didn't seem to need anything, least of all from me. "Can I order some wine?" I asked, just to break the moment. "Sure," she said, "but only if it's because you want it, not because you think you should." The comment came without accusation, almost too gentle. The waiter approached, and she ordered for me without glancing at the menu. When he stepped away, she turned her eyes back to me, curious. "You don't seem comfortable in places like this." My heart picked up speed. I'd rehearsed neutral answers, clever little sentences designed to derail the evening. None of them fit this room. "I don't get out much," I admitted. "Not to places like this." She smiled at the corner of her mouth. "I do. Not because I like the show of it, but because I learned early that taking up certain spaces is its own kind of resistance." The word hung between us, resistance. Something in me recognized itself in her. Not in the chair, not in her body, but in the posture. I thought about the first time I ever accepted a favor in exchange for something that shrank me a little. I thought about the silent promises I'd made to my own reflection. Just this once. It was always just this once. "And you?" she asked. "What brought you here today?" The money seemed to pulse inside my bag. I thought about lying, about inventing some generic sad story. But the question didn't leave room for that. "A bad decision," I finally said. She tilted her head slightly. "The worst ones usually are the most interesting." "Okay." Quick pause, because I need you to understand something before I keep going. I have replayed that line. The worst ones usually are the most interesting. More times than I'd like to admit. If you're the type who also collects terrible decisions and somehow turns them into good stories later, hit subscribe. Because that's basically this whole channel. And while you're here, tell me in the comments what you think I was actually being paid to do. I promise it's not what you're guessing. Okay. Back to the table. The wine arrived. She raised her glass but didn't toast. She just watched my hands shake slightly as I picked mine up. "You're trying to look brave," she said. "But your body's telling a different story." My face went hot. "Do you always read people like this? Only when they walk in armed," she answered. "And you walked in armed." That landed hard. I hadn't told her anything. And still, she knew. Maybe not the details, but the intention. The plan started coming apart inside me like wet paper. I thought about standing up, apologizing, leaving before it was too late. But something, curiosity, maybe desire, kept me in that chair. "Can I ask you something without you getting offended?" she said. "Depends," I answered. "Do you see me? Or do you just see the chair?" The question didn't come with pain. It came with tiredness. I took a breath. "I see you," I said, surprised by my own honesty. "And that's exactly what's scaring me." She smiled. A real one this time. A smile that wasn't asking for approval. "Then we're being honest," she said. "That's already more than most people manage on a first date." First date. The word cut straight through me. Because despite everything, this still was a date. And something inside me had already started wishing it were real. For a second, I imagined what it would have been like if I'd come here on my own, wanting to. If there were no money involved. If I could touch her hand without feeling guilty about it. The image came too fast, too intimate. I pushed my glass back, trying to get some control back. "You seem like someone who runs the moment she starts to feel something," she observed. "And you seem like someone who stays," I shot back. "I do," she confirmed, "even when it hurts." The silence came back, but it was different now. It wasn't a threat. It was possibility. And I knew, with an uncomfortable kind of clarity, that if I stayed at that table much longer, I wasn't going to be able to finish what I'd been paid to do. The choice was starting to take shape in front of me, not as morality, but as fact. And for the first time that night, I had no idea which version of me was going to win. The restaurant filled up as the night went on, but our table felt sealed off from the rest of the world. The conversations around us turned into distant noise, like rain against glass. She watched everything with quiet attention, while I felt far too exposed for someone who'd walked in with a plan. There was something unsettlingly intimate about the way she held silence, like she knew I needed it to keep from falling apart. "You didn't answer," she said after a while. "Answer what?" "Whether you're staying," she said, simply. "Or whether you're going to bail before dessert." I swallowed hard. No one had ever put my running into words so plainly. "I'm still deciding," I confessed. "So am I," she said. And for the first time, I realized this night wasn't a test only for me. She told me her name. Harper. I told her mine. Dakota. Names said quietly carry a strange delicacy, like they're opening something that doesn't have a shape yet. When she said mine, there was an almost imperceptible care in it, a slight adjustment in tone, like someone holding something fragile without knowing if it's safe to grip. My body reacted before my mind did. A short, treacherous shiver. "Can I ask you something else?" she said. I nodded. "Whoever paid you didn't want me to feel bad. They wanted me to stop believing." The sentence went through me like a slow blow. She wasn't guessing. She was reading the logic behind the cruelty. I thought about denying it, laughing it off, faking outrage. But I was too tired to lie convincingly. "I know," I murmured, and that's the worst part. She didn't look shocked. She just breathed in, like she'd lived through this before, with other people, in other forms. "People pay so they don't have to deal with their own discomfort," she said. "It's easier to wreck a date than admit you're afraid of something that doesn't fit the mold." The money in my bag felt heavier. I wanted to throw it away, but I didn't have the nerve yet. Not yet. My mind pulled hard toward the past. I remembered myself accepting jobs that made me smaller, relationships where I was always the placeholder body, the woman, until someone better came along. I'd learned to survive by shaping myself into whatever people expected, even when it cost me pieces I never got back. Sitting there, I recognized the pattern repeating, except this time, for the first time, someone was showing me the whole design. "You don't owe me anything," she said, as if she'd been following my thoughts. "Not explanations. Not staying." "But you're offering me a choice," I answered. "I am," she confirmed, "because I know what it's like to not have one." The entree arrived, untouched, forgotten by both of us. I watched her hands resting on the table, steady, without anxiety, without asking permission to exist. There was beauty there. Not a performed kind of beauty, something rarer, coherence between body and presence. I caught myself imagining what it would feel like to touch her hand, to confirm that this wasn't only in my head. The thought scared me with how easily it arrived. "You're overthinking," she said, smiling faintly. "I always do that right before I mess something up," I answered. "Or right before you get it right," she corrected. The comment kept echoing inside me. Getting it right. I didn't know what that meant anymore. Until then, getting it right had meant surviving, getting out unscathed, not forming attachments. But there in front of her, the definition seemed to shift, take on riskier edges. Maybe getting it right meant staying. Maybe it meant telling the whole truth. Maybe it meant admitting this night had already slipped out of my control. "If I stay," I started, my voice low, "I won't be able to fake it." She looked at me with total attention. I wouldn't expect anything less. The decision began forming inside me, still fragile, still uncertain, but real. For the first time, I considered not going through with the part I'd been assigned, failing the plan, choosing someone, and myself, over the money. The fear was still there, but for the first time, it wasn't bigger than the desire to stay, and I stayed. Staying wasn't a heroic gesture. There was no swelling music, no grand decision. I simply didn't get up. I stayed there, breathing the same air as her, feeling time stretch like the table had built its own time zone. She noticed before I did. She didn't smile, didn't celebrate. She just relaxed her shoulders, the way someone does when they accept something that didn't need to be forced. "So," she said after a few seconds, "you picked the hard road." "I always figured leaving was the hard part," I answered. "Only when you don't want to feel anything," she corrected gently. The waiter came back to check on the food. She asked him to box it up. I watched the careful way he spoke to her, trained, almost excessive care. She caught my look. "People think kindness means talking quieter or slower," she said, "when really, it's just talking to me like you'd talk to anyone else." I nodded, feeling a strange discomfort. Not because of her, because of me. How many times had I myself been reduced to something that didn't define me? "Do you want to head out?" she asked. "No," I said, too fast. "I mean, not yet." She tilted her head, curious. "I was thinking we could take a walk after this. There's a park a couple blocks over." The invitation sat between us, loaded with a new kind of closeness. "I push my own chair," she added, almost laughing. "Before you get weird about that too." I laughed, relieved. The tension eased into something lighter. I paid the check before she could react, not as a power move, but as someone trying to repair something invisible. She noticed, of course. "Don't turn this into penance," she said. "Staying is already enough." We left together. The night was warm, the air carrying the smell of wet pavement. The streetlights bounced gold smears across the asphalt every time a car passed. Walking beside her took attention, not because it was hard, but because of rhythm. I adjusted without noticing, like my body was learning something new. "You walk fast when you're nervous," she observed. "Habit," I answered. I always figured if I didn't run, someone would run for me. She went quiet for a few seconds. Nobody should have to live like that. At the park, we sat side by side, watching the distant movement of people. Kids running around, couples talking on nearby benches, ordinary life going on, indifferent to the storm building inside me. I thought about telling her everything right there, the deal, the amount, the reason. But the courage wasn't whole yet. "You don't have to explain yourself," she said suddenly. "How do you know that?" "Because when someone's carrying guilt, it shows up in the small things. In how they hold their bag. In the rush to please." I closed my eyes for a second. It was terrifying to be seen with that much precision. The past came back like a poorly cut film. I remembered relationships where I settled for less so I wouldn't be alone. Nights where silence felt safer than the risk of being rejected. Being there with her lit up every one of those memories, but also something new. The sense that I could choose differently. "Can I ask you something that might not be fair?" I said. "Go ahead." "Have you ever regretted trusting someone?" She took a breath before answering. "Many times, but I regret more the times I stopped trusting out of fear. Those cost me pieces of myself I never got back." The answer echoed inside me. I thought about the money, the plan, the phone that hadn't buzzed yet with confirmation of the job. I thought about how easy it would be to justify all of it later. I needed the money. It wasn't personal. But there, on that bench, those excuses felt too small. She touched my hand, a brief, respectful touch, but enough to send a current through my whole body. "You're not a bad person," she said. "You're just tired of surviving." The words hit me harder than I expected. My eyes stung. I didn't cry. Not yet. But something in me had started to give. In that moment, I knew the truth couldn't wait much longer. That the night was moving toward a point of no return. And that whatever I chose in the end, something essential in me had already shifted. And I still hadn't told her everything. The silence after the touch wasn't awkward. It was dense. Like the air itself had gained weight. My breathing changed, too shallow for what I needed to say. The truth was pushing to get out, but confessing meant losing control of the story. Something I'd always avoided. She noticed the shift in me and pulled her hand back gently, respecting the invisible line I'd drawn myself. "You went distant," she observed without accusing. "I got scared I'd ruin everything," I answered. "Ruin what?" she asked. The question was almost too simple. I looked toward the park's lit-up fountain, trying to organize thoughts that had never learned to line up. My mind went straight back to the moment I took the money. I remembered the flat tone on the other end of the line, the way it was framed like a favor. "Nothing personal. We just need the date to fall apart." I'd said yes too fast. Not out of cruelty. Out of exhaustion. Because saying no had always felt like a luxury I'd never learned to use. "Sometimes," I started, "we accept the wrong things thinking they don't define us." She looked at me with full attention. "They do, though," she answered. "If only for what we have to forget in order to keep living." Her words opened a painful crack inside me. I thought about how many versions of myself I'd left behind, how many times I'd hardened just to feel less. Sitting there with her, that armor felt wrong. Too heavy for that night. "Do you want to tell me what's going on?" she asked. I shook my head. "I want to. I just don't know if I can yet." "That's fine," she said. "The truth has its own timing, too." Her understanding disarmed me more than any pressure could have. A couple walked by pushing a stroller. An ordinary scene, but it hit me hard. I imagined possible futures, choices stacking up, paths opening or closing because of decisions that seemed small in the moment. I didn't want that night to become one more badly resolved memory. "Can I ask you something hard?" she said. I nodded. Are you here because you want to? Or because you have to? It took me a while to answer, because for the first time I didn't know the answer myself. At first, I had to, I admitted. Now, I don't know anymore. She smiled faintly. That confusion is usually a good sign. My phone buzzed inside my bag. The sound was too loud in the quiet of the park. My heart jumped. I didn't need to look to know who it was. She caught my reaction immediately. "You don't have to answer," she said. "I know," I replied. "But it won't disappear just because I pretend it doesn't exist." I picked up the phone. The message was short. "Did it work? We need to confirm." The words looked dirty on the lit-up screen. I felt shame. Deep shame. Not from her judgment, but from my own. "It's now, isn't it?" she said, with a calm that hurt. "Yeah," I answered, my voice cracking. I looked up at her, searching for something that would let me keep going. She didn't look away. "Be honest," she said, "with them, and with yourself." I took a breath and started typing. The words came out easier than I expected. "No, it didn't work, and it's not going to." The reply came almost instantly. "What do you mean?" I deleted the whole thread, blocked the number. A small gesture, a final one. When I looked back up at her, I felt a knot form in my throat. "I can't promise anything beyond this," I said. "But I won't lie." She watched me for a few seconds that felt too long. Then she nodded. "Sometimes, that's all there is to offer." I sat back down, exhausted and strangely light. The fear was still there, but it had changed shape. It wasn't the fear of being found out anymore. It was the fear of feeling too much, of wanting to stay, of letting that night turn into something bigger than I'd planned for. "So now what?" I asked, almost a whisper. She smiled, a small but real smile. "Now the night is ours. No script."
Hi, it's Lena Sine. Quick reminder before we get back to the story. If you like these stories with a little more room to breathe, my Patreon has a full library of exclusive stories you won't find here on the channel. Different stories, more space for the characters and their feelings. Links in the description.
That sentence went through me with a mix of relief and vertigo. I didn't know what was coming next. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't running. I was there. Whole. And that alone was a big enough break from a lifetime of wrong choices. The night seemed to breathe along with me after I said it. No script. The phrase kept echoing in my chest like a promise I wasn't sure I could keep, but that for once didn't feel like a lie. She stayed quiet for a few seconds, watching the slow movement of the park, like she was letting that decision settle between us. "Do you usually leave right after ending something?" she asked. "Usually," I answered. "That's when the nerve runs out." She nodded, understanding. "Then stay a little longer, not as proof, just as presence." We sat there longer than I could measure. We talked about small things at first, like our bodies needed to relearn how to exist without tension. She told me about her apartment, full of plants that insisted on surviving despite the low light. I told her about all the places I'd passed through without ever putting down roots. Every sentence seemed to pull the next one along, like we were stitching something too delicate to rush. "People always assume my whole life is defined by the chair," she said at one point. "Like everything I feel has to run through that first." "It doesn't," I answered, almost on reflex. She smiled. "No, but sometimes I let people think that. It's less tiring." Her honesty touched something tender in me. How many times had I let myself be defined by whatever was easiest to explain? The wind picked up, colder, and I took off my jacket without thinking, offering it to her. She accepted it easily, wrapping her shoulders in it like it was something too intimate to refuse. The simple gesture hit me with unexpected intensity. I realized I was leaning in now, not out of obligation, but want. And that scared me more than any plan ever had. "You're shaking again," she observed. "It's not the cold," I answered. "It's new." She laughed quietly. "New things do that, especially when you've already learned how to survive without them." My mind kept dragging the past back up, like it wanted to test me. I remembered dates where I faked interest, relationships where I was always the disposable part. I'd never stayed long enough to find out if something could actually grow. Being there, feeling time stretch out, felt almost like an act of resistance. "Can I ask you something personal?" I said. "Go ahead." "Do you still believe people can meet and end up on a different path because of it?" She thought for a few seconds. "I believe some encounters shift something in you. Sometimes it's a lot. Sometimes it's just the way you see yourself afterward." The words stayed with me. I already felt like something had shifted, even without knowing exactly what. When we finally stood up to leave, I realized I didn't want the night to end there. We walked slowly down the lit sidewalk, our bodies learning a new rhythm side by side. There was no rush, no promise. Just a quiet presence that said more than any hurried declaration could. "You can head home," she said, stopping in front of her building. "You don't have to keep going." "I know," I answered, "but I want to." The sentence came out steady, surprising even me. For the first time, wanting didn't come wrapped in guilt. She looked at me carefully, like she was weighing something invisible. "Then stay a little longer." We went up together. The elevator felt too small for everything that wasn't being said. Our arms brushed lightly, and the shock was immediate, quiet, electric. I felt my whole body respond before any thought could get in the way. Inside the apartment, the light was soft, and the smell of plants and old coffee filled the air. It was a lived-in space, not a staged one. I felt strangely comfortable there, like the place had been built to hold people, not impress them. She rolled closer, slowly, stopping a few feet from me. "Still scared?" she asked, almost in the same tone as the first time. I took a breath. "Yeah." "And are you leaving because of it?" I looked at her, feeling the weight of the choice form again. "No," I answered. "Not this time." She smiled, and in that moment, I knew that no matter what happened next, I'd already crossed an important line. Not the line of a date that went well or badly, but the line of letting something real begin without any guarantees. And to me, that already felt like a quiet kind of revolution. The apartment was quiet in a way that didn't feel forced. It wasn't the kind of silence loaded with expectation. It was an open space where anything felt possible, or not. She rolled back a little, giving me the time I still needed, and went to the kitchen with calm, precise movements, like every gesture had been rehearsed by life itself. "Water? Tea?" she asked, without turning around. "Water's perfect," I answered, noticing how different my own voice sounded in there. Less defensive, more real. While she filled the glass, my eyes moved around the room. The plants scattered around weren't decorative. They were cared for. There were books with worn spines, a few quiet photographs on the walls, objects that didn't need explaining. Everything spoke of permanence, of someone who'd learned to actually live in her own space. It touched me in a way I didn't expect. I'd always lived like a guest in my own life. She came back and handed me the glass, our fingers touching a beat longer than necessary. There was no rush, no big gesture, just a sharp awareness of each other. I felt my heart pound, but I didn't try to hide it. For the first time, it didn't seem necessary to. "You can sit," she said, motioning to the couch. I sat. She stayed in front of me, hands resting on the arms of her chair, watching like she was deciding something. "I need to know," she said quietly. "Do you want to stay here? Or do you want to be saved from staying?" The question was too direct for any automatic answer. I closed my eyes for a second. Flashes of the past came fast. Me accepting invitations I didn't want. Staying out of fear of disappointing someone. Staying when I should have left, and leaving when I should have stayed. "I want to stay," I answered, opening my eyes. "And I want to know what it feels like not to run afterward." She nodded slowly. "Then let's go slow." It didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like care. She sat beside me, leaving a gap between us that wasn't distance. It was choice. We talked about the things that usually get saved for later. Small fears, odd habits, the little rituals we'd picked up in hard times. She told me about the accident that changed her mobility, without drama, without asking for pity. I told her about the exhaustion of always living in survival mode. The words kept fitting together with a rare kind of ease. "People think intimacy starts with touch," she said. "But it starts here." She touched her own temple lightly. "When you don't have to hide what you're thinking." I smiled. "Or what you're feeling." "Especially that," she agreed. The touch came later, almost inevitable. First, my hand brushing hers, like someone testing the water. Then our fingers laced together carefully, respecting invisible limits. My body answered with a contained, deep intensity. There was no rush, no performance of urgency. Just presence. I thought about the money, distant now, almost irrelevant. I thought about how much that night had already cost me, and how much it was giving back. It was startling to realize that the right choices also take courage, maybe more than the wrong ones. "You're shaking again," she said with a soft smile. "I'm feeling something," I answered. "That's good," she said. "It means you're actually here." She leaned in a little closer, and our bodies found a careful, unrehearsed closeness. There was no immediate kiss. There was shared breath, and eyes that held steady without looking away. I felt like crying, not from sadness, but recognition. Like something in me had been seen without being used. "If at any point you want to leave," she said, "go. Don't turn this into a debt." "I'm not going anywhere," I answered. "But thank you for giving me the way out." She smiled. "Freedom does that. It makes you stay by choice." When our lips finally met, it was gentle, almost too restrained for what my body wanted. But it was exactly what I needed. A kiss that didn't ask for a promise, didn't demand a future, didn't erase the past. It just confirmed the present. Time passed in a strange, elastic way. Conversations broken up by comfortable silences. Touches that never pushed further than they needed to. I felt safe in a new kind of way, not protected from the world, but whole inside it. At some point I rested my forehead against hers and closed my eyes. "Thank you for not letting me be the worst version of myself," I murmured. She took a breath before answering. "You made that choice on your own. I just held the space." Sitting there, in that quiet apartment, I understood that real change doesn't happen in explosions. It happens like this. Slowly, without witnesses, when someone decides to be honest in front of their own fear. And I still didn't know what came next. But for the first time, that didn't paralyze me. The night arrived without warning. There was no clock marking the passage of time. Just the soft exhaustion that settles in once the body stops fighting. We were sitting on the living room floor now, backs against the couch, lights off, the city breathing outside in distant sounds. I felt the warmth of her body next to mine. Solid, real, impossible to ignore. "Do you usually sleep badly?" she asked after a long silence. "I usually sleep running," I answered. "I wake up before anyone notices I stayed." She didn't comment. She just moved a little closer, offering presence instead of analysis. That touched something deep in me. For the first time, I didn't have to explain my own defense mechanisms. They were visible, and still, accepted. I realized I knew almost nothing about her tomorrow. What she did, who she saw, what plans she had. Normally, that gap would leave me restless, already bracing for future rejection. But there, strangely, it didn't matter. The night wasn't asking for continuity. It was asking for truth. "Can I ask you something that might not be fair?" I said. She smiled faintly. "Unfair questions tend to be the most honest ones. Have you ever been used before?" She took a while to answer. "I have," she said, simply. "Plenty of times. Out of curiosity, out of loneliness, out of guilt. Almost never by choice." Her words opened an old wound in me. I thought about every time I'd used someone as a temporary shelter, with no intention of staying. "I'm sorry," I murmured. "Don't be sorry for me," she answered. "Be sorry for yourself if you keep doing it." The care in that wasn't wrapped in sweetness. It came in clarity. The conversation drifted somewhere deeper without me noticing. We talked about wanting someone, about how it changes once it stops being urgent. She said she'd learned to tell the difference between people who came close out of fascination and people who stayed out of genuine will. I listened with an uncomfortable kind of attention, recognizing patterns in myself I hadn't named yet. "You know this doesn't have to turn into a pretty story," she said, looking up at the ceiling. "It can just be one true night." "Is that enough?" I asked. "Sometimes, one true night changes more than years of lying does." I rested my head on her shoulder, feeling the quiet weight of the gesture. There was no implied promise in it, just the decision not to run from that moment. My body relaxed in a way I couldn't remember, like it had finally been allowed to exist without keeping watch. An uncomfortable thought crossed my mind. What if I was mistaking comfort for love? The doubt came sharp, almost cruel. But instead of pulling back, I decided to share it. "I'm scared of getting attached to something that's just care," I admitted. She turned her face toward me. "Care is love too," she said. "It's just the kind that doesn't shout." We sat there, letting the sentence settle in different places inside us. I realized I'd always chased intensity because I confused noise with connection. There, in that stillness, something in me was being retaught. "Are you leaving in the morning?" she asked without tension. The question didn't sound like an ask for a commitment. It sounded like plain curiosity. "I don't know yet," I answered. "For the first time, I haven't already planned the exit." She smiled. Small, almost too private to be seen from the outside. That already says a lot. I thought about how that night had started with money, with deception, with a part I was supposed to play. Now I was there. No character, no defenses, no guarantee. And strangely, that felt safer than any plan ever had. Sleep came slowly, shared. We didn't sleep together in the obvious sense. We slept close, each of us respecting the other's space, like the care kept going even into unconsciousness. Before closing my eyes, I felt her hand touch mine one more time. A simple, almost everyday gesture that anchored me to the present. In that moment, I understood the real turning point of the night hadn't been the kiss, or the confession, or breaking things off with the person who paid me. It had been something quieter and deeper. I had stayed awake inside myself, and that shifted something important. Morning came filtered through soft light through thin curtains. There was no alarm, no jolt. just the city slowly picking its rhythm back up, like it respected whatever was still fragile in there. I woke before her, watching the calm shape of her sleeping face, trying to figure out exactly when that woman had gotten past my defenses without asking permission. I got up slowly, feeling the cold floor under my feet. The kitchen was quiet, almost reverent. I made coffee with careful movements, like any sudden gesture might break something invisible. While the water heated, my mind started doing what it always does, calculating what comes after, the explanations I'd owe, mostly to myself. My phone had been buzzing forgotten in my bag since the night before. I picked it up without unlocking it, feeling a familiar tightness in my chest. It was always like that. Whenever something good happens, my body braces for the loss. An old reflex, trained over years of rushed exits. But this time, there was a small difference. I didn't want to leave before she woke up. She showed up in the kitchen doorway, hair a mess, face still marked by sleep. The smile that appeared when she saw me there was simple, almost ordinary, and exactly because of that, it hit me hard. "Morning," she said, like this scene could happen again some other day. "Morning," I answered, feeling something warm up inside. We had coffee together, unhurried. We didn't talk much. There was a quiet understanding happening, a fine-tuning between what had been and what could be. I noticed my body was alert, but not on guard. It was a new feeling, like I was learning to stay without bracing for an exit. "You seem far away," she observed, with the same calm precision from the night before. "I'm trying not to ruin this," I answered honestly. She smiled faintly. "Overthinking is just another kind of running." The comment didn't land as criticism. It landed as a reminder. The past came rushing back. I remembered mornings where I got dressed in silence, trying to leave before anyone woke up and started expecting things. I remembered the relief mixed with guilt of shutting a door behind me. There, in that bright kitchen, those memories felt like they belonged to someone else. Someone I didn't fully recognize anymore. "You don't have to decide anything right now," she said, like she was reading my thoughts. "Not about us. Not about you." "I know," I answered, "but I'm scared of turning this into one more thing I walk away from before I even understand it." She nodded. Staying is a skill too, and nobody learns it without getting it wrong sometimes. We went out for a walk. The neighborhood was waking up. People walking dogs, kids with backpacks, cafes opening their doors. Ordinary life kept going, indifferent to the quiet shift happening in me. I pushed her chair for a stretch when she asked, not out of duty, but as something shared. The small gesture filled me with a strange, almost shy pride. "You push pretty well," she joked. "I'm trying to keep up with your pace," I answered. "You don't have to," she said. "Pace can be negotiated too." We stopped at a small bakery. The smell of warm bread mixed with the clink of cups. We sat by the window. She watched people go by with a calm curiosity, like someone who'd already made peace with her place in the world. I found myself wanting that same calm. Not as something distant, but as something possible. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Go ahead." "Would you let yourself come back here, without having to explain yourself?" The question sat between us. "Come back." The word carried both weight and promise. I felt the familiar fear shift inside me, but it didn't have the same authority anymore. "I think so," I answered, with careful honesty. "I don't know when or how, but I think so." She smiled, and in that smile there was more acceptance than expectation. "That's enough for now." The day went on, and with it, the uncomfortable certainty that I'd have to leave. Not as an escape, but as the ordinary continuation of life outside that encounter. The goodbye approached without drama, and somehow that made it harder. I wanted it to be easy. It wasn't. Outside her building, she looked at me with quiet attention. "You don't owe me staying," she said. "Just the truth." I took a breath. "Then the truth is, I want to come back, even scared." She nodded, like someone receiving something fragile with care. "The fear can tag along. Just don't let it be the one making the call." We said goodbye without any big promises. A long hug, restrained, full of things unsaid. When I pulled away, I felt a familiar tightness. But something about it was different. It wasn't emptiness. It was space. A space where something could grow, if I let it. Walking home alone, I understood the biggest shift hadn't been that night. It had been the morning after. For the first time, I wasn't running from something that had actually reached me, and maybe that was the beginning of staying. Coming home felt stranger than I expected. There was no drama, none of that emotional hangover that usually follows an intense night. There was quiet, a different kind of quiet, one that didn't demand immediate distraction. I dropped my bag on the table, kicked off my shoes, and stood in the middle of the living room for a few minutes, like my body was still learning to take up that space alone. The money was still there, untouched. I pulled it out of my bag carefully, like handling something contaminated. The bills looked unreal in daylight, almost offensive. I put it all in an envelope and pushed it to the back of a drawer. It wasn't a heroic gesture. It was just the recognition that it didn't belong to me anymore. I didn't know yet what I'd do with it, but I knew I couldn't pretend nothing had happened. I spent the day in slow motion. Every small task, washing a mug, answering generic texts, taking a shower, felt weighted with something new. My mind kept drifting back to her without effort, to the way she looked at me without rushing, to the total absence of pressure. That unsettled me more than any obvious conflict ever could. I always knew how to handle rejection. Care, though, I didn't. In the middle of the afternoon, my phone buzzed. It wasn't the blocked number. It was a message from her. Short. No pressure. "Get home okay?" I held the phone for a few seconds before answering. The fear tried to push through, whispering that I was building something I wouldn't know how to sustain. But there was another voice now, quieter, steadier. "Made it. Thanks for checking." The reply came almost instantly. "Glad." 2 words, and still enough to take me apart. The past kept trying to raise the alarm. I remembered other times I'd mistaken kindness for a promise. Times I stayed where there was no real room for me. But something about this exchange felt different. No urgency. No stated expectation. Just presence. And that forced me to reconsider my own old stories. That night I went out for a walk. I needed to feel my body moving, to confirm I was still in the world. The streets were full of people coming and going, whole lives crossing without knowing it. I thought about how the encounters that change us most tend to happen exactly like that, in the middle of the ordinary, without warning, without a soundtrack. The difference is what you do afterward. I stopped at a small park, sat on a bench, and let the memories of the night before come back without resistance. The restaurant, the question, the silence, the careful touch. I realized I hadn't romanticized any of it. I wasn't building a pretty movie to escape reality. What moved me was exactly the fact that none of it had been exaggerated, the restraint, the conscious choice. I asked myself if I was ready for something that wasn't built on urgency or scarcity. I'd always lived relationships like they were temporary by default. That protected me from disappointment, but it also kept me on the sidelines. Thinking about coming back, about continuing, took a kind of courage I was still learning to access. When I got home, there was another message. No rush. Just wanted you to know I liked getting to know you. There was no hidden subtext, no implied request, just truth. I felt a knot in my throat. I answered with the same care. Me too. More than I expected. I went to bed early, but it took a while to fall asleep. Not out of anxiety, but a strange sense of internal wakefulness. Like something in me had woken up and refused to go back on autopilot. I didn't know if this would turn into a long story, a love, or just one transformative encounter. For the first time, I didn't need to know. Before closing my eyes, I thought about how much that woman had handed me back to myself without even trying. I hadn't been rescued. I hadn't been saved. I'd been seen. And that changed how I saw myself, too. I fell asleep with an uncomfortable, gentle kind of certainty. The real turning point wasn't choosing to stay or to leave. It was not lying anymore about what I felt. And whatever happened from there, I wasn't going back to who I was before. A few days passed before I saw her again. Not because I didn't want to, but because, for the first time, I was learning not to confuse wanting with urgency. There were short, spaced-out messages, nothing demanding. A good morning here, a small memory there. Every exchange seemed to confirm something quiet. Neither of us was trying to own the other. We were just letting something exist. When we met again, it was at a plain little coffee shop, far from anything fancy. I got there first and sat by the window. No money in my bag, no hidden plan, no part to play. Just me. When she came in, rolling toward the table with that same steady ease, I felt a familiar warmth in my chest. Not the kind that consumes, the kind that warms. "You came back," she said, with a restrained smile. "I came back," I answered. "Even scared." She nodded. Fear doesn't disappear when the choice is real. It just learns to walk alongside it. We talked like people picking up a sentence they'd left unfinished, not like people starting over. We talked about the week, about ordinary things, but there was a deeper layer holding it all up. At one point, she looked at me carefully and said, "I need to know if you're here because you want to, or because you feel like you owe it." The question came direct, honest, with no room to dodge. "I'm here because I want to be," I answered, "and because I don't want to keep using excuses to leave before it's time." She took a breath, like that answer had cost her something too. "Then we're in the same place," she said, trying not to repeat old patterns. The coffee went cold between us while the world kept going outside. I thought about everything I'd almost lost out of fear of feeling too much. I thought about the woman I'd been that first night, sitting in an expensive restaurant, dirty money in my bag, a lie ready on my lips. She still lived somewhere inside me. She just wasn't in charge anymore. "You know," she said carefully, "that I don't need to be chosen to feel whole." "I know," I answered. "And maybe that's exactly what makes me want to choose you." The words didn't sound like a promise. They sounded like a provisional truth, and that was enough. When we said goodbye, there was no cinematic kiss, no big declaration. There was a firm, present handhold, a quiet agreement to keep trying, to mess up less, to run less. I walked down the street feeling something rare, not certainty about the future, but acceptance of the present. That night, at home, I opened the drawer where the envelope still sat. I took the money out and put it in a box. Not as punishment, as a reminder, a symbol of the person I'd decided not to be anymore. I closed the lid carefully and put it out of sight. I don't know where this story is headed. I don't know if we'll love each other for years, or if this will run its course and turn into something else entirely. What I do know is that ever since that one simple question, "Are you scared?" I haven't been able to pretend I don't feel it. Maybe love doesn't start with certainty. Maybe it starts like this. When someone sees you in the exact moment you're about to repeat the worst version of yourself, and stays anyway. Not to save you, but to remind you there was always a choice, and I chose to stay. Not because it was easy, but because for the first time, staying felt more honest than running. If this story got to you in any way, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments what part hit you the hardest. Sometimes all we need is knowing we're not the only ones still up on the other side of the screen.